welcome to all our viewers and welcome to a new episode of Africa Today, our show bringing you all the latest news and events related to the African continent. I'm Angie Meher and I'm joining you for today's episode. As usual, we begin straight away with a look at some of the news making the headlines, beginning with the latest with Russia, which has over the past several years strengthened its presence in the African continent, vowing to intensify grain exports, weapons deliveries, as well as energy cooperation. Africa is gaining importance to Russia, which has been isolated from Europe and the United States since launching its offensive in Ukraine in February of last year. We have more details in this report.
Russia hosts African leaders this week for a summit aimed at boosting ties despite concerns in Africa over the conflict in Ukraine and the suspension of a deal on Ukrainian grain exports. Isolated on the international scene since launching the military campaign in Ukraine, President Vladimir Putin still has support in several African countries. At the summit in St. Petersburg, Putin's native city, several African leaders are expected, including South African President Cyril Ramaphosa. The summit is the second of its kind after an inaugural one that was held in 2019 in Sochi in southern Russia. The end of a deal that has allowed Ukrainian grain exports through the Black Sea to global markets, including Africa, is set to dominate the agenda. Russia pulled out of the deal earlier this month, saying a promise to allow Russian exports had not been honored. Over a year, the deal allowed around 33 million tons of grain to leave Ukrainian ports, helping to stabilize global food prices and avert shortages. In the last few days, Moscow has sought to reassure African partners, saying it understands their concern on the issue. The Kremlin has said that without any doubt, it is ready to export grain for free to African countries that need it. Putin has said Moscow could return to the agreement, but only if the part of the deal allowing Russian grain and fertilizers is fully implemented. African leaders have, for their part, sought a higher profile role in the diplomacy around the conflict in Ukraine. A delegation of African leaders visited Moscow and Kyiv last month to urge both sides to cease hostilities, but the initiative had little effect. The summit in St. Petersburg comes a month ahead of a summit of leaders of the BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa, which is due to take place in Johannesburg. South Africa has said that Putin, who is the subject of an international arrest warrant for his actions in Ukraine, will not be attending in person.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We're now delighted to be joined over the telephone by our guest, Dr. Raouf Ghaffar, our political analyst. A very good afternoon to you, Doctor.
Good afternoon to you, my dear.
Thank you so much for joining us. So let me start by asking you about Russia, which is hosting African leaders this week for a summit aimed at boosting ties. How do you see the timing of the event, especially after the suspension of the deal on Ukrainian grain exports, sir?
We remember 2019, there was the first summit between Russia and Africa in Sochi.
Yes.
And since then, the relations, of course, between Russia and Africa have always been very strong and very close, etc. But it became even stronger and closer after the first summit.
Yes.
Now, this is the second summit in St. Petersburg. I think that the numbers speak for themselves.
Yes.
We are talking about around close to $20 billion trade exchange between the Russia and us. Hundreds of thousands of tons of grains are coming from Russia, despite the inconvenience, of course, of the Russian-Ukraine war. I mean, the relations are very, very strong, and they go long ago. So it is a matter of enhancing these relations and trying to expand. Although Russia is cooperating with Africa practically in everything, starting from humanitarian projects all the way to the supply of food and grains, etc., in that industry, infrastructure. I mean, you name it, Russia is here in Africa to cooperate with African states. So I think that having these meetings on regular basis, it helps increase the magnitude of cooperation and of trade exchange between the two countries. You were asking about the timings. We just
Yes.
had the G20 meeting a few maybe days or weeks ago. Russia was not there, but again, it means that Russia is reconfirming its good intention to help and to work closely with Africa in any endeavor the African countries see fit. And this is exactly what would be discussed in the summit of the 27th, 28th of this month.
Yes, indeed, Doctor. Now, a number of conferences and events, bring together Russia and African states, and they've been held, several of them, over the last few years. How do you see these events contributing to the well-being of African countries' economies, sir?
Africa, although it is very wealthy with resources, but they don't have, unfortunately, the means or the know-how to develop these resources and to exploit these resources. And here comes the role of industrialized countries to help in this endeavor. And I think Russia has been there for that. They have expertise, they have know-how, they have experience enough to help all the countries in Africa to exploit and use their resources in a better way. So again, as I say, things are moving always to the better, and meetings are taking place individually with different nations and sometimes collectively, as exactly the meeting of the summit meeting of this coming date. So as I say, this has been going on for a lot of time, deep roots, and this is exactly what President Putin said in his address prior to the conference, that he is confirming the willingness and the intention of Russia to keep on helping and cooperating with all the African states.
Absolutely. Now, of course, as the end of the grain deal has come to light, how do you see this affecting the situation in global markets, especially in African markets? And in the last few days, we've seen Moscow saying that, it is reassuring its African partners and they understand the concern of African countries on this issue. How do you read their statement, and how do you see, possible steps forward in this regard, Doctor?
When you're talking grains, when you're talking food, then it becomes very critical.
Yes.
And maybe the African states needed this assurance from their main supplier that it is continuing, it is not affected by what is happening there, and we are here for you. We will continue supplying you with all you need as far as food is concerned. So this was a very important statement in this period of time.
Yes.
We hear a lot of row about the grain transportation and the threats from both sides that they will, storm the ships carrying grains, etc. But this comes in a good time to assure their partners that it will not stop, and the chains of provisions will continue. The grains will come. But don't worry about your food. We are keeping our promises to supply you with the quantities we have agreed with you upon, and need not worry about this.
Now, as Russia has become more isolated from Europe and the United States, Doctor, since, of course, launching its offensive in Ukraine last year in February, how do you see it branching out to other continents like, Asia as well as Africa?
Well, I mean, Russia had maybe commercial relation with Europe and the United States, maybe gas going in and out, and some other, of course, cooperation. But the big countries, the big industrial and commercial and economic forces, they always look at emerging markets to help. And for a country like Russia, the importance of Africa may, if not equal, maybe exceeds the importance of Europe. So they are moving into this direction, coming into the markets that need help, that have resources and don't know how to exploit it, whether financially or from the expertise and know-how standpoints, and offer what they have in order to complement what they need. So this is very smart, and I think that this will make up, of course, the harm that has reached Russia.
Yes.
With the problems with the West, this will compromise, and I think that it will help for a better Russia as much as for a better Africa.
Absolutely. Now, this summit in St. Petersburg comes ahead of another summit of leaders from the BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, which is also due to take place in Johannesburg. How do you see, the BRICS bloc's recent moves in the international economic stage?
In my humble opinion,
Yes.
I think that the balance is changing a little bit. BRICS is getting more powerful on the economic level, and they are looking for countries to join, not the BRICS, but at least in the banks, etc., make use of this grouping in order to help out countries and have mutual interest on both sides. So I think that this summit will represent a big dossier to be discussed during the BRICS, and probably we will hear very soon that the BRICS will have a lot to do with these emerging markets and will play a bigger role in helping and developing the continent of Africa, which is for us the most important.
Absolutely. Finally, Doctor, of course, what prospects of success do you expect for this upcoming Russian-African meeting and cooperation on both the short and the long terms?
I see it is improving. It will continue to improve. Commerce and economic exchange will grow. Cooperation in other endeavors will get better and bigger. And as far as Egypt now is concerned, I think that we will see more and more cooperation in different fields, as I say, based on mutual respect and mutual interest and benefit.
Right. I'd like to thank you very, very much, Dr. Rauf Ghaffar, our political analyst. Thank you so much, sir, for your time and your insight, and for joining us on today's edition of Africa Today. And still continuing with news from the continent, a top envoy to Sudan's paramilitary rapid support forces said it was time for peace in Sudan and the Darfur region, even if the RSF's war with Sudan's regular army passed its 100th day. We have more details in this story.
Rapid Support Forces representative Youssef Izzet, in remarks in the West African nation of Togo, said it was time for peace in Sudan and the Darfur region. He was attending talks aimed at preventing Sudan's Darfur region from sliding deeper into war. Sudan's conflict broke out in the capital Khartoum on April 15 and spread to Darfur, leaving at least 3,000 dead across Sudan and hundreds of thousands displaced. The conflict has pitted Army Chief Abdel Fattah al-Burhan against his former deputy Mohammed Hamdan Daglo, commander of the paramilitary RSF forces. On the sidelines of the talks in Lomé, Izzet said, quote, "We are willing to participate in any kind of meeting for peace and bringing people together and stop the war in Darfur and in Sudan," end quote. He said thus, this is the time to end the war, to start a new future for Sudanese people, peace, development and equality. The vast western region of Darfur, which in the early 2000s already suffered a bloody war, has been hit by some of the worst violence in the new conflict. The International Criminal Court has opened a new probe into alleged war crimes in Darfur, its chief prosecutor Karim Khan said earlier this month.
Still with our news segment, wildfires raging across Algeria during a blistering heat wave have killed more than 30 people and forced mass evacuations. The government has reported the toll as temperatures hit 48 degrees Celsius in parts of the North African country, which has recorded 97 blazes across 16 provinces, also fanned by more strong winds. We have the details.
The death toll as wildfires sweep across regions of Algeria has risen to 34 people, including 10 soldiers, on Monday. The statement was made by the Interior Ministry as a heat wave spreads across North Africa and Southern Europe. Some 8,000 firefighters were battling to bring the flames under control. The Interior Ministry said that it is continuing its firefighting operations in Bomiridis, Buira, Tiziuzu, Jijil, Bijaya, and Skikda regions. About 1,500 people have been evacuated so far. The authorities have launched a judicial investigation into the causes of the fires. A major heat wave is sweeping across North Africa, with temperatures of 49 Celsius recorded in some cities in neighboring Tunisia. In Tunisia, wildfires swept through the border town of Milula. Witnesses said that fires that had begun in mountainous areas had reached some people's homes in the town and forced hundreds of families to flee. A civil protection official said that they had evacuated hundreds of the town's residents by land and by sea in fishermen's boats and Coast Guard vessels.
With this final news item, ladies and gentlemen, we come to the end of today's edition of Africa Today. We do hope you have enjoyed it. You're in the company of myself, Angie Meher. Thank you for watching.